Welcome to today's session, which is our last session on financial education, and we have two panels this morning. We'll be coming to the Minister after 11 o'clock, but first we have Martin Lewis, CBE, broadcaster and founder, chairman of MoneySavingExpert.com, and Russell Winnard, Chief Operating Officer of Young Enterprise. You are both very welcome. Can I ask first, Martin, you were at the heart of the campaign for financial education to be involved in the national curriculum, and that was achieved in 2014 with strong cross-party support. 10 years on, what's your assessment as to the current state of financial education in schools and colleges in England?
I think in many ways getting it on the curriculum was a Pyrrhic victory. In some ways it was counterproductive. Beforehand you had volunteer groups and other people funding and providing support in schools to go into there to teach financial education. We campaigned hard to get it on the national curriculum. We got it on the national curriculum in England, of course. And at that point, a lot of the resources were pulled from those who'd been volunteering in private sector. And then we had the change in the way that schools works, the academisation programmes, the free school movement, all of which means they don't have to follow the national curriculum. So the sort of holy grail of trying to get it taught on a compulsory basis in every school, which is what getting it on the curriculum was about, became self-defeating. It also meant there were less resources put into place. And frankly, the amount of resources the state and government has put in since then have been, well, it's been completely flaccid. I mean, and to a detrimental level. So while I can't say that I regret we won the campaign at the time, I'm not sure it really changed the game in any way, because the rules were changed afterwards about what being on the national curriculum means. And I still think there is a real poverty of financial education in the UK, and much of it comes down to a lack of resourcing for schools, a lack of resourcing for teacher training, and a lack of emphasis being put on this so that head teachers who are already under stretch have the ability and the want to prioritise and make sure that this is being done, which I, of course, for obvious reasons, would say it's an absolute necessity.
And some of that challenge in terms of getting resource is about where it sits within the national curriculum as well. What's your view on that, and where do you think financial education should be included if this was something that was being followed by every school?
Well, it was me who sat in the room with the then Minister for Education at the time, and who had the sort of cut and thrust debate about we want it to be here, well, we don't want that, we want it here, and we negotiated. And it was a result of a negotiation rather than some great policy idea that this should be split across maths and citizenship. And one of the things I really wanted in maths is that if you do financial numeracy, it should be called financial numeracy so that the pupils understand that's what they're doing at the moment, and it should be using contemporaneous examples. If you're doing credit cards, go get some credit card leaflets or go online and use actual current contemporaneous examples to make sure it's understood this is a practical, general, real life situation. We talked about that. I mean, the split across maths and citizenship isn't a particularly bad one, but what you then need is you need some coordinating body within the school. You need a financial education coordinator within the school who makes sure that those two topics are being married up at the same time. And absolutely understand that anything we want to put into schools, there is something else is going to have to give. Now, the research that we did in the run-up to 2014, and it was very detailed, actually, while there was some pushback from maths teachers many years before that in the early days, a lot of the research we did said that the pupils who were disengaged from maths in secondary school, once you actually do proper contemporaneous financial education, they understand it's practical, actually it's re-engaging and it brings them back in. It's not a negative, it's a positive. It's a positive for maths, not just a positive for financial education. So I will leave Russell to talk about where it should sit in the curriculum, because that's his business, and we work together on this a lot, and we work together very well. I just think it needs to be somewhere. But what we have to do, it is too wishy-washy at the moment. We have to find a way to make sure every school is teaching this. I'll forgive me.
Every school in every phase? Because we're talking primary, secondary, post-16, or are you focusing there on every secondary
integral
school?
For me, secondary and post-16. I would like it to be in primary. And Russell may differ on that, but that is my view. I think it's absolutely integral. But I feel, and this is a deliberate soundbite, but it is worth saying, payment protection insurance mis-selling, that I was heavily involved in helping people get their money back. £40 billion of that, 40 billion was paid back. Now that was a policy that people shouldn't have been sold and missold, and was done by confusion marketing and deliberate systemic mis-selling by script by Britain's biggest financial institutions. It's not 10% or 1% of that money that we need. If 0.1% of the amount of money that was missold on payment protection insurance was put into financial education, which would be £40 million, we would absolutely, completely revolutionise everything that we have ever done. And we are talking, rounding errors of the amount paid back on just one mis-selling scandal. And perhaps if we put the 40 million in, we wouldn't have the 40 billion mis-selling scandal in the first place. This is about being joined up as a society and making sure that as we live in one of the world's most competitive consumer societies, that companies spend billions of pounds a year on advertising and marketing and teaching their staff to sell, that we try and redress that balance with a little bit of consumer and buying training and financial education for our young people when they are professionals at learning, and that is when they're at school. It's much tougher once they're adults. Teach them when their whole job is to learn.
Thank you. I'll come to you, Russell, on this question around the last 10 years. Obviously, Martin referred to the number of outside organisations that were
being delivered. Now, that's a really interesting stat, because that means there's a third of schools where teachers believe it's not being delivered. There are a third of schools where the teacher believes it's being delivered, but young people are saying it's not. And then there's a third where the teacher's saying it's being delivered and the young people are saying it's being delivered. So this is really inconsistent on many levels. And that, for me, that's the fundamental thing that we need to get better, is that consistency across all schools in delivering financial education.
Mm-hmm. And just one more thing. I mean, schools obviously tend to focus time and attention and value what they get measured on. And so it's either what is inspected or it is what they get grades in exams for. Do you think there's a case for more dedicated, specific financial education qualifications? Or actually, are we comfortable that this is being done through maths, in which everyone gets a qualification of some, or takes a qualification of some sort, and citizenship, in which the vast majority do not?
In my dream world, of course, we'd have a financial education qualification at GCSE and A-level, and pupils would be able to take it, but that isn't the priority. Because what is the priority is remedial, basic understanding of what is going on out there. And therefore, the issue for me is not the maths citizenship split. I think it could be improved. I think it could be better, it could be stronger, there could be more. But it's actually, we're not, I'd like to give evidence to you in 5 years' time on that. At the moment, the fact is it's just not being done at all. That's what we have to address before we address how we do it better.
I think there are some striking points for us to raise with the Minister very shortly. Can I hand over to Mohammed?
Thank you. My question to you, Martin, you personally funded a financial education textbook, Your Money Matters. Yes, there. Well done. And almost 350 copies have been sent to state secondary schools in England. Why did you feel that it was necessary?
I was told it was necessary by the then Minister for Education, Nick Gibb, who I sat in a meeting with, and I went to complain about, we've had it on the curriculum for about 3 years, nothing's been done, no state funds have been put in. And he said, we need a textbook. I said, yeah, we need a textbook. He said, we need a textbook. I said, we need a textbook. This went round in circles for a little bit because I couldn't quite understand what was being said. And I said, you should do a textbook. And he said, no, you should do a textbook. Now, I'm not the government. I'm a private individual. I actually have a substantial political objection that a private individual should be asked to pay for a textbook to go into all schools. I think we wouldn't ask GlaxoSmithKline or the chairs of GlaxoSmithKline to pay for chemistry textbooks. I don't understand why I was asked to pay for it, but on a practical basis, I was told quite succinctly it was not going to happen unless I funded it, so I funded it over my own objections. And we funded the English textbook, 350,000 textbooks to all schools. It's still available for those watching. Forgive me plugging. Free download from the Young Money website. Anybody can get it. Lots of adults say it's useful. Since, after that, we did Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, which was jointly funded, 50% by me and 50% by the Money and Pension Service. And I'm glad they stepped up to the plate. We're actually just, as an aside, we're working now. I've just funded Young Money to work on an adult non-curriculum mapped version because I think lots of adults said it was useful, so we thought we could do some small tweaks and get it out there for them. But I mean, I think that it's completely wrong. And the problem is we've got a teacher's guide as well. There's still no teacher's training. There's no ongoing training for teachers. There's just zero resources put in this. And we're not talking... I mean, you'll tell me, what was my donation for this, Russell? You'll remember more than I did.
In excess of £500,000 in the end.
Okay, so £500,000. Now, that's quite a lot from my charity budget, but it's not a lot from state education funds. I mean, and the farce of this, if you forgive me, because it's a good place to say it, we came back with our first proposal working through a publisher where I'd fund the writing of it and some of the distribution, and we'd have a publisher. And then the Department for Education said, oh, no, you can't do that. I said, what do you mean we can't do that? I said, well, we can't support it if you go via a publisher. We're not allowed to support it if you go via a publisher. So again, after a bit of I said, what are you telling? They said, you have to publish it. So not only did I have to fund the writing and the distribution, we actually had to fund the publishing and the printing. We had to self-publish. If we didn't self-publish, we couldn't get the Department for Education to do the letter it did to schools supporting the textbook. Now, forgive me, what a bloody farce. I mean, is that not just ridiculous? A private individual was asked to fund this. I didn't... Very deliberately, in the contract of funding that I did with Russell, I wanted it stated that I did not have editorial control, right? Because I thought it was important. I've written a foreword, and because of what I do in my day job, I read it and gave some feedback about things I thought could be nice, but not editorial control. But I could have gone in a contract for some form of editorial control or overwriting it, couldn't I, as a private individual? I could have done that. I could have put my stance into schools. I could have used it as a piece of propaganda. I could have done all of those things. That doesn't seem right to me.
What kind of response do you get from teachers, pupils and leaders?
I funded Young Money to do it. I mean, because of what I do, of course, everyone's always very nice to me about it. So I think Russell's probably better to ask that for an honest opinion than I am.
Russell?
Yeah, of course. So we've conducted a number of surveys on this, and it's impossible for us to go out, just to caveat, it's impossible for us to go out and conduct really significant surveys with young people. We've focused on the teachers because those are the individuals to whom the textbook has been sent. The very latest suggests that there are in excess of 13,000 teachers who have used Your Money Matters, the textbook. That equates to a very, very conservative figure of 1.5 million young people, but that is really conservative. And in terms of the outcomes, 89% of teachers agreeing that the textbook has improved the quality of their financial education delivery, 88% agreeing that it has increased their confidence to deliver financial education. And that's a crucial one. But teachers, irrespective of the survey, it will come back that teachers are not confident to deliver financial education. And what the textbook has done is it enables teachers to just have that security of being able to read through. I was a teacher myself. I remember doing it with science textbooks. I would have a read through before I went and delivered. In exactly the same way, this can just build that confidence, enabling teachers to deliver financial education themselves, which if we're truly talking about sustainable financial education, it has got to be teacher-led. There are all sorts of enrichment that can be added in to build that provision, but it has got to be led by the teachers that know their young people, know their ability, know the community. That's really important. And all of that has been made accessible because of the textbook.
There are some people who... Sorry. You want to
read into the record, if you don't mind. Can I tell you what the chapters are? Because I think that's quite useful to make everybody understand what the textbook's about. So chapter 1 is saving, which is ways to save, interest, money and mental health. Chapter 2 is making the most of your money, which is budgeting, keeping track of your budget, ways to pay, value for money and spending. Chapter 3 is borrowing, which is debt, APRs, borrowing products and unmanageable debts. Chapter 4 is after school and the world of work, student finance, apprenticeships, earnings, tax, pensions, benefits. Chapter 5 is risk and reward, which is investments, gambling and insurance. Chapter 6 is security and fraud, identity theft, online fraud and money mules, all of which are crucial points that children should know about. That's the English textbook. It's nuanced different in each of the, because it's curriculum mapped in each of the other nations, but that I think gives you an overview of the breadth of information we're talking about. Lots of practical examples and the teacher's guide that goes with it. All these were free, sent to schools. I mean, it's the right thing to do, but you still want to teach teachers how to teach it.
There are people who think that there's no shortage of resources. And they're saying the problem is that teachers are completely overwhelmed because they have to choose from so much. What's your view?
Well, I'm not going to argue with teachers if they say they're overwhelmed, because I think they're the ones that know. I disagree. I think there is a shortage of proper curriculum-based resources. There is only this textbook. There are lots of after-school clubs and volunteer groups and wonderful organisations that do great forms of financial education, and I think all more power to their elbow. But ultimately, to do this properly, you need a universalised financial education that is taught in every school, that is on the curriculum, that is taught by the professionals in teaching, which are the teachers, who are properly resourced, who are properly educated themselves and get ongoing teacher training to keep up with it. And I do not believe the resources are being put in place to do that. I don't think schools or head teachers feel the resources are in place to do that. Yes, in some of the young money brilliant centres of excellence where the head teachers are making it a priority. And it is worth noting that parents and the general public, I did another, it was only a Twitter poll, so it's only self-selecting, 96% support. When we did proper polling before 2014, it was 98% of people support this. And it is ridiculous the way that so many parents all they say to me is, I wish I had that. I wish I had that. I hope my kids get it. And we need to remember the one counter argument to this is it's a parent's responsibility. Well, that's great for my daughter because it'll go pretty well, to be fair. But what all you do then is you perpetuate a cycle of the financial no's and the financial no-nots.
So your wonderful work didn't stop at the school level. You also work in Open University and teamed up with them to write free...
So on my website, we have the Academy, I like to call it, which is the MSc Academy of Money, jointly with the Open University, where we have totally free 6 two-hour courses where you can go and self-qualify to teach yourself more about finance. And frankly, half of my life is financial education on my television.
How's that going?
Academy, it's very popular. It's very. I can't remember the numbers. It's probably in my briefing pack somewhere, but I'm not wearing my glasses. So, but I mean, it's either I think we're in the high tens of thousands of people who've taken the course, and people love it. There is an appetite out there for this. People feel ill-educated. They know that they have a lack of financial capability. They're scared, and the lack of financial capability does more than just making people disengage. The problem with the lack of confidence, even when you try and engage, and I know this from lots of data in the work I do, is people never take the final mile. You know, when I go and used to do roadshows, 2/3 of the question I get were what I would call permission questions. There were people who'd done all the reading, done everything they could, but they go, should I do it? And it's that lack of the lack of making the final decision, and people in the end, they just don't do it because they're too scared, and they're far happier to do nothing than to take a decision that they may regret later because they're worried about it. And our entire society, our economic structures, our personal finance structures, you know, what we're going in the middle of a cost of living crisis, this echoes violently in a path down all of it. We are not talking education here today. I also chair the Money and Mental Health Policy Institute, right? Money and mental health are so intricately linked. You are 4 times more likely to have a debt problem if you've got mental health issues. The clinical treatment time for depression is exacerbated by up to 18 months if you have a financial problem. We have to be very careful not to think, well, of course, what we're teaching is financial education. This is absolutely, in a capitalist consumer economy, at the core to individual well-being, financial capability, financial knowledge, and living in a good society. So even though it may put extra pressure on teachers, I think we need to work through that. I think we may need to give them the resources. I think we need to encourage head teachers. That wouldn't be a reason for me for not trying to push ahead with it.
On which point I want to bring in Flick. We're going to need to make some progress, I'm afraid, Mohammed, because
So just going back to the teachers then, who is best to provide it? Is it external providers, or you've just said it's best to be teachers? In which case, what sort of teacher training and how do we give that? And should we have specific teachers delivering just financial education, or who should be delivering it?
Look, I'll give my answer before Russell, but this isn't rocket science. We're not asking them to become a professional money-saving expert, these teachers. Right, we're talking maths teachers. Maths teachers are perfectly capable of understanding financial numeracy. We're talking PSHE with good resources. We are talking remedial, getting kids up to a decent start point. I don't believe I've ever met a secondary school teacher who isn't capable of doing this. You know, it is just about putting the resources and the teaching in place. So it's in the curriculum. I think as it's in the curriculum, it'd be great to have guest people coming in to help, but I absolutely think it has to be the teachers who are teaching maths and citizenship who are doing this.
But we've heard from various sources that teachers aren't confident in walking into the classroom and teaching financial education.
Well, they would be, because there are no teaching resources, no teacher training. It's not in teacher training school, and there's no ongoing teacher training. It's a vicious, until we break that cycle. I promise we could you give me 1,000 teachers who are in these subjects who aren't confident. They come and spend a day with Russell and myself, and they'll walk away full of confidence, right? I will happily do it for the state for free if the resources are set up to put in the teacher training conference. I'll pay my own transport, right? But we have to start resourcing the training of this. And I understand teachers, of course they're not confident. They've never been taught to do it. Of course they're not confident.
Can I just, on that teacher training, we train around 3,500 teachers every year. And to put that in perspective, around 216,000 secondary school teachers. So it's a very small proportion. The training that we provide is from a half day to a whole day, no more than a whole day training. And it used to be in person, now potentially it's hybrid, so it's online. But the impact of that teacher training, just that half day, so maybe 3 hours, 6 hours worth of training, that enables teachers to increase their confidence. They're far better at being able to develop and deliver appropriate financial education for the young people in front of them, so they can adapt it accordingly. And University of Edinburgh Business School did a big research piece on our teacher training, and they found that the impact of training teachers just for that short period of time began to have an effect. It continued to have an effect 2 years on. So they developed their training, they developed their ability, their pedagogical practice, and they were still delivering financial education that was of better quality, consistency than without training. So it doesn't have to be huge amounts of training. It can be relatively small. To Martin's point, it's not rocket science, and this is about confidence and understanding that financial areas that we're expecting young people to be developing, whether that's secondary or primary. We've got some planning frameworks that have learning objectives for young people from age 3 all the way to age 19. If a teacher can understand what those areas are, how it can be delivered, and what further support there is, which is really important. There are great organisations out there who support financial education. I sit on the Youth Financial Capability Group with some of them, My Bank, Money Charity, Red Start, Just Finance Foundation, all really committed to delivering financial education. But I will come back to my earlier point. It's got to be driven by the teacher. The teacher has to have that oversight of what is being delivered because they know the young people the best.
I mean, we've just done a teacher retention and recruitment inquiry, and the workload is massive, and I think that's part of the issue. So trying to give them a day off to go and do financial education or whatever, which absolutely is fundamental. So I agree with you on this.
I wouldn't call it a day off. It's not a day
Sorry,
off. But I would also say, frankly, if you want recruitment and retention of teachers, then it's quite useful to give them financial education as well. Yeah. And when I went into school, when I first started this back in, I think it was 2008, I did a programme called Teen Cash Class, where I taught a group of kids for a day before this all came off. And the person who we sent the kids home to save their parents' money, but the person who saved the most amount of money was the teacher who sat at the back of the class to supervise. So I'm not sure that I think teachers might appreciate it. There's nothing in here a teacher shouldn't know, and if they don't know, it would be a useful course for them.
Okay. And then what about, outsourcing financial education to external providers? You have very clearly said that it's teachers the best to provide it. But if there is a shortage of maths teachers, which there is, and and teachers are unable to do that, where do you see external providers coming in, and who would they be?
It's part of that picture of provision. The teacher ought to be at the heart of building that provision, but that provision can consist of tools and resources that the teacher use in their school. It can be professional development, it can be in-school support from other organisations. But again, Martin's point about having that coordinator in school, there needs to be someone in school that is aware of where that is being delivered, through which subjects, how's it being delivered. It's important that we do have this variety. The Money and Pension Service did a provision mapping exercise, 102 programmes and supports, tools and resources for financial education. And I don't think that's excessive at all. I think as an educator, you want to be able to select from all of the resources, select what works for you, what works for your young people, and make it appropriate. And I don't think there should be a situation where financial education provision looks exactly the same in every single school. I don't think that's right. It should be tailored to the needs. Yeah. So yes, teacher-driven, teacher-coordinated, but absolutely bring in the range of support that is available and accessible.
Okay, but the financial coordinator is possibly the most important person, isn't it?
And for me, what would be a wonderful solution is you have this running through the curriculum, you build it up, and then when you get to the point where in old money you're either getting near or in sixth form, where it starts to all become real to you, maybe post-GCSEs when you're still at school time, that's where you want a week or two, or you could even do a dedicated week on this, where you start to educate children. And that's the point where externals coming in could be incredibly useful, going to schools, educating, teaching the proper life skills that children could then have for once they become independent adults at the point where it's nearest. You could also do that at similar points in the sixth form. So I'm very much not opposed to external teaching, but I do not want to sacrifice the curriculum-based teachers teach on the curriculum, within a curriculum subject that is exam marked like maths, all of that I think is what gives it the strength and the resourcing in schools. Otherwise it gets dropped and put on the bottom of the pile.
Thank you.
Thank you. Andrew.
Thank you. So just building on that curriculum point, how would you both describe the difference between enterprise education and financial education? And should enterprise education be delivered separately, or should it be part, not the same, but part of the same thrust of teaching?
We may philosophically disagree on this. Huh. So I'm always very plain when I donate money to young money. I do not donate money to young enterprise, because I think enterprise education is incredibly valuable and important, but it's a completely different subject. Now, there's crossover skills, as there are in many subjects, but ultimately, you have to, there is one thing to tell people, we live in an adversarial consumer society. You can argue a company's job is to make money from people, and a consumer's job is to stop them. They are two sides of the same coin. But when you're teaching people about enterprise, about profit, about going and making money from people, that does not empower you to look after your own personal finances. And equally, when you're teaching somebody about their own personal finances, how to not be scammed, not be frauded, how to understand that adverts are there not because they're good for you, but because they're being paid to get there to sell you stuff, it is a totally different form of education. So I would like some really clear lines between the two. They're both important, but my side's the money side. It's not that I'm anti the enterprise side, it's just not what I do. So I would keep the two quite distinct. But you have economics A-levels and you have business studies A-levels, and they're all factored in and seen as a valuable thing. Looking after your own personal finances, quite rightly, it's not going to set you up with a job for life. It is a different type of skill base. So I think the separation is there, and I'd keep the separation there.
Russell.
We might slightly disagree, only because working with children and young people as we do, and thousands of children and young people on various enterprising activity, what we have found, and it's really interesting, is some of the most immersive enterprise experiences that we provide. The skill that young people are developing the most is financial capability. It's really fascinating, particularly when we're working with schools in less advantaged areas. It skyrockets. And there's something about young people being able to have access to money, to make money decisions and choices, in some cases for the very first time, that applied learning that enterprise scenarios can afford young people. And I take the point that it's business finance, not necessarily personal finance, but I feel like the two do overlap. Well, we see it overlap in young people. And young people's enterprises as well, they are all environmentally, sustainably focused, community focused. They absolutely have a passion for good. So we do see that financial capability being a really integral part of a lot of the enterprise work.
But for me, it's clear lines and understanding the difference between the two. You know, a company making profit, where's that profit coming from? You have to wear both hats. You know, most people do both. Most people work in a job and work for a company which is trying to profit maximise. But at the same time, they're also consumers trying to keep the money in their own pockets. And an understanding of that sort of necessary friction, I think, is very important.
Has the fact that financial inclusion is now part of the national curriculum made a difference to enterprise education particularly, Russell?
Great question. I don't necessarily think that it has. I think there's a great opportunity there because they are inextricably linked, and also careers as well. So young people have very, very limited views of the roles available to them within financial services. Mm-hmm. Minimal. It's a banker or it's nothing. Whereas you can pretty much do anything within the financial services space. And I've always felt that there has been a vacuum for volunteering within the financial services sector and beyond, because you don't have to be within financial services to come into a school and talk about financial education. But that role model, that aspirational piece is really quite important. We know it's important for careers development, but I think it's equally as important for financial education, and we haven't got that working quite yet.
Thank you.
Can I just ask, you both mentioned the link there with careers and that side of things. Obviously, we completed a big inquiry on careers, education, information, advice and guidance. One of the things we were looking at within that was the Gatsby benchmarks. They are at least producing something which is measurable in terms of this and being measured, and therefore schools are being encouraged to engage with them. Do you think there's more scope to link those to financial or indeed enterprise education and to actually achieve some of the measurable outcomes through marrying it into that process?
I think there are, for sure. I think it works for both, for enterprise education, for financial education. That engagement with employers piece is really important. That experience of work is also really important. And again, financial capability and an individual being financially capable, it's inextricably linked to the world of work.
But there's something to Martin's point about preparing people for that world of work and supporting them is understanding that when you get your payslip, you're not just getting all the money that's in your salary, but it is being divided between the tax and the pension and everything else. And I think that's something which universally, the education system has not failed to equip people for.
The education system hasn't. I think universities have singularly failed in explaining student finance and how it works. We educate our youth into debt, or at least into what we call debt. I would argue it probably isn't a debt, but that's another discussion. And yet we never educate them about debt. And then I think employers, people don't understand their paychecks. They don't understand that their tax code number is their responsibility, not their employers, and people feel it's derogated up to the employer, but it isn't. So right across society, we don't do this well enough. And by actually starting this in school, you think of the benefits that you have, but also the employability of young people. Because, whatever industry you are, actually, there's very few jobs that don't involve some idea of budgeting, right? Or at least understanding that you have a budget and you have to stick to it. And so, while I would still want those clear lines, I do think there are very transferable skills from looking after your own personal finances to then going and looking after your employer's finances once you get there, and understanding what an interest rate is. I mean, that a high APR is a bad thing, not a good thing. It's as simple as that. And don't assume that everybody knows that.
Well, I remember during those 2014 debates, we were quoting statistics about university students, and the proportion of them who thought that an APR was the higher the better. So it's definitely a challenge. I mean, Vicky, can I bring you in?
It's a lovely book.
Thank you.
And you're obviously an amazing communicator, which is why you do what you do. How do you find best to communicate with young people? Because obviously picking up a textbook might be something that they may do in school, but a lot of young people will communicate in other ways as well.
Well, there are great exercises in the textbook as well. It's quite practical. I've always found whenever I speak to young people about just be straight and honest and open, and don't try and patronise them. Just talk to them how it is. Now, sometimes they won't. Pensions are tough to engage a 14-year-old in, let's be honest, so you need to keep that pretty simple. But mobile phones and car insurance are a lot easier once they're getting in the higher teens. But I do think it is worth my philosophy on this, and my philosophy on the whole of finance for adults as well, is it is very difficult for everybody to teach everybody the answers to anything. I mean, you can't, and I'm still learning every day and still researching and working myself. What we actually have to teach them to do is understand the language and understand what questions to ask. And that is really the point of financial education. To know that there are questions to ask and to try and help figure out what the questions are so that you can navigate a path through it. So even though there's a lot of practical stuff in there, even if pupils don't retain it, as long as they understand, there's a level of natural scepticism that you have to give them. That when somebody says this is good for you, you have to ask who is saying it's good for you, and are they acting from your interests? Or, is it a debt crisis counselling agency that only has your interests at heart? Or is it a bank whose job is also to sell products to you? And that's all part of financial education. And I think those honest, straight conversations work very well.
Given that
but I don't go
the
into
young
schools
people
in the way that
I know spend a lot of their life outside school on mobile phones and not necessarily reading books. Should there be more of this information available in online formats?
If we go back to the original of the textbook, the Minister was very keen that there was a textbook. And when we talked about maybe we should do budgeting via digital, no, budgeting needed to be done on paper. And so there was a little bit of to and fro on that. I don't disagree in what you say, absolutely. I mean, I still think this is...
recommend that as a committee to say...
digital engagement and digital inclusion is a core part of any form of financial inclusion, and it's absolutely integral to it. I think the textbook works well because I do think having something... It's also democratising. Everybody can have it. It's free to schools. They're all available in there. But that doesn't mean there shouldn't be supplementary ways to do this, and many of the exercises couldn't be digitised. But, maybe the state could pay this time, not me.
I hear that, but we can make recommendations at this time about
Absolutely.
That sort of thing. We could make recommendations about more digital means available for young people.
Sure, Young Money would be delighted to build it.
You're the expert.
Absolutely, look, everything. I came up with we want teacher training, we want ongoing teacher training, we want proper textbooks for schools, we want apps and games and things that people can play that give financial education. We need a rounded, funded way to do this. And we're talking low numbers, millions of pounds. You're not talking hundreds of millions. But I mean, Russell, he's the educator, the teacher, not me.
I'm going to carry on if I can. One thing, and I've got a couple of constituency cases, among tragic cases of young people who've been groomed into either becoming money mules or groomed into county lines. We'll give you loads and loads of money if you do this for us, and they've ended up in one of them, young offenders institutions. So not only lost their money, but lost their independence and nearly lost their lives. So I just wonder within this if more of that risk should come earlier on rather than page 136, that real risk of this serious criminal activities.
And there are resources that will focus entirely on that area. So Stop Loan Sharks have a resource, great resource. We provide a quality assurance piece called the Quality Mark. So organisations that come through it will review it. It's got the quality mark of that good standard. And I think there is some of that variety around that you speak about, that digital resource. I think the biggest challenge we've got at the minute, so there's 102 different products, making them as accessible as possible to teachers and other educators, because some of the learning is that learning that is best within the home. So parents and carers, how can parents and carers become involved in that financial education in a meaningful way that complements maybe what is happening in school?
And a lot of charities and different organisations, banks have suggested that there needs to be practical as well as theoretical ways of teaching people. What's the best balance to get here? I love the exercises within the book, which are quite practical exercises, but
for me, it's a fairly equal balance. There are some things that you just cannot do in school. It's not practical to do in school. Very, very limited opportunity to do it. So there are things which can be done in the classroom, but there are things which are far more appropriate to be done at home if that's applicable, if they're able to do it. If you can combine the two, the biggest influencer on a young person's financial capability is evidenced as their parents or carers. The second is their teacher. So these two really do need to be coming together. There's a primary programme that we operate called Money Heroes together with HSBC UK. That is we built that so that parents and teachers could connect around the one young person they have in common. And there could be things that happen in school, in the classroom, and there are things that happen at home. And those two complement each other to really develop that financial capability.
A lot of evidence we've had has said that there should be more of that financial education at primary level. You've mentioned Money Hero. Would you agree with that recommendation, and what would be other effective ways to have more primary?
I would absolutely agree. For me, you've got Money and Pension Service in Cambridge University. I'm sure you've heard this before. The research that says that the young people begin to form their money habits by the age of 7. Now, their money cognition begins well before that. So when they can see transactions happening which have all moved cashless, which can be quite a strange thing for a 3-year-old to comprehend what's actually going on now, far more difficult than it was 15 years ago. Yep. But that cognition is starting through that observation, through the listening to discussions in the family home. If we know that habits begin to be formed by age 7, then we need to be beginning the process a whole lot earlier. And for me, it's really important that we begin at primary. How we do that, realistically, it would make sense to mirror what we have in secondary. So you've got that sequential progression through primary and into secondary. And primary young people are so capable. Okay, they will tell you the difference between an AER and an APR. They'll tell you what a debit card and a credit card, what the difference between those. They are amazing. And if we can get that foundation by the time they leave primary, just think what we can do by the time they leave secondary or FE. I think it's crucial that we do more in primary.
I'm very supportive of it being in primary education as well. I would, if you made me choose, I would go for secondary, but I'm very supportive of it being in primary. On the money mule thing, I think there's a certain... What you have to understand is the situation we're in. We don't really have state support for this. We do a textbook that goes into schools and is, frankly, in most head teachers and teachers' purview, and we want parental pressure to get it to be taught. Money mules, which is at the more extreme side, is very important, but is, in actual numbers of children, is a very small percentage. If you start a textbook on money mules, all the parents who are supporting this at home who are wanting their kids to learn about saving, investment and debt, they're going, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
So it's about, you're right, it needs to be taught, but there are different risks for different children in different schools. And I think I totally get why with your constituency, and you feel passionately about it, as rightly you should. I would say we're probably in the right order.
And to that point, actually, the fundamental lesson, which applies to Money Mules as to many other things in marketing, is if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is, and understanding how to work that out financially is probably the capacity you need to build.
That's what the textbook is about. If you go to my questions, not answers, you know, it's not just what you teach them factually. It's starting to build the decent, sceptical consumer brain, which is what you need to survive. The textbook takes you through that. But those warnings should, I think that's up for a teacher. If you're in a school where that is going to be a plausible risk, and where you're in an area where that's going to be a plausible risk for your pupils, then absolutely we need to prioritise that.
I was interested, Russell, by what you just said about digitisation. It probably makes it harder for young people to understand value of money, because it's not a physical, here's a fiver and how do you spend a fiver. Yep. Are there comments you want to make that about how the committee might think about recommendations on that way?
Bearing in mind we're also doing an inquiry in parallel on screen time as well, which might be
super. I think it is it feels a very nuanced difference to some of us who are quite used to just tapping out with a watch or a phone, but actually from a very young person's perspective, it's incredibly different. And from a parent, carer or educator's perspective, it adds a number of additional steps into what that story is. You know, how do you dig into what's actually happening there? To the digital piece, I think one of the opportunities is for young people to begin to understand that in an applied way. If there were some sort of freely available learning tool that young people could use to understand that cashless process and see what's happening, so that there is an account, it is taking money from that account, because it's far less, as you say, it's far less tangible. So yes, it's an important area. It's created more of a challenge in that financial education space, and I think in terms of things like saving as well. We've seen a movement since the cost of living crisis. We've seen a movement back to jam jar saving, where you literally have on your mantelpiece the jam jars for different things and cash put in there. Well, that's because it's far easier to see. It's more tangible. It makes more sense. We need to use that principle, but young people are going to grow up in an age where everything is digital and cashless.
One of the problems for young people that I hear through parents is understanding the difference between real money and in-app money. So, the number of children who are playing games where they're spending money and then suddenly that converts to in-game currency, to real currency, paying for in-game currency and paying for things. The in-app purchases is a real issue, and there is a confusion out there amongst young people, and that's one of the problems with digital money. In the old days when you had cash and you had money in a game, well, the money in the game wasn't real and the cash was real. Now the two things are very similar. Easy to get. And there are a lot.
How systemic an issue is this, and is this something that this committee should be making a recommendation on?
Well, look,
in-app money.
In-app payments and security of in-app payments are for children. It is. I haven't done a study systemically. I have a mailbag like you do. So I'm just looking at the constant mailbags that parents get in touch and say, my kids just spent this much money, I didn't know. And you say, and let's be honest, you can say don't let them have your PIN code, but kids are they're better digitally educated than parents. They see it, they know your PIN code without even having to look at it. That's just what they do. Yeah. So we know how that works. And I just think there isn't a difference. I don't think there is a big enough flag between real money and fake money in-app purchases, especially at games that are targeted, or they're never targeted, games that are some young people play, marketed. And I think, so how you start, you actually think about that from a primary level, because certainly by the age of 10, most kids are involved in that sphere. And so all of that would be useful in primary education. And actually it's quite an important lesson. Understanding what's real money, and that's the one difficulty of the game with fake money, is, again, you might blur the lines between real money and fake money if you've got a game that's teaching you how to spend fake real money, but it's not real money in an app. If you see,
that's even before we start talking about the marketing of Bitcoin to young people and teenagers.
I'm getting a bit meta.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to add on that one point. We held a surgery for teachers, and the number of teachers who said that young people in their school, these are under 18s, are trading cryptocurrencies on their phones, and that is their activity. You know, they're not texting their friends; they're trading cryptocurrency. It's definitely needs a focus.
Ian, sorry, you waited very patiently. I know you wanted to come in earlier.
I mean, I was struck by a point you made earlier about people not making decisions, you know, having researched something and not being able to make a decision. And I remember when I first became a counsellor many years ago, the leader of the council once said to me, "Every time you don't make a decision, you've made one."
Yeah.
You know, so, and I think that's an important point. You know, it's a very simple lesson, but it's an important point. It means that you stay with the status quo. But I also I'm chair of governors of a primary school in Gateshead, where 50% of the youngsters are on free school meals. It's like a poor community that school serves. And I'm wondering, you know, is financial education for some families almost like an abstract concept? You know, how do you manage with no money?
Well, I mean, that's an existential crisis right across our society at the moment. The number of people who go to debt counselling agencies, over 50% of them are still deficit budgeting afterwards. Can't fix that one. Frankly, that's your issue, not mine. That's a political issue in society. I don't think it is existential. I don't think it... You have to teach them, because hopefully life is going to improve. Hopefully they're going to be able to get work, enable and not be in that situation later on. I'm very minded of a project I did with another charity, the Russell Trust, the food banks, where I have funded money and debt counselling in food banks. And what we found was, at the point of asking for help, people were the most receptive to getting this. For adults, obviously, people were the most receptive to getting to help. So while it is that concept, you know, if you talk about this in the round, I often do a speech in my shows when we get to Christmas, and when I'm talking about debt, which is actually about when someone says they can't come out, let's stop saying, "Oh, come on," and actually let's be in a society where we can say, "My finances don't allow me to come out," and that's seen as a reasonable excuse to not be able to do something. And actually, we all need to go, "Oh, totally get you. Maybe we'll come around to your house and we'll all sit in and we'll watch the telly," or whatever it is. We'll do something of that. And I think there is something to be said in those 50% of free school meals home of financial education. I mean, we have to be very careful not to scare children, but actually helping children understand. I was listening to Peter Kay's book, bizarrely, on the way in, and he was talking about when his dad lost his job and he didn't get the Atari he wanted, he got a different present. And actually, I'm not sure there's anything wrong. We won't get into the issues with the Father Christmas issue. But anyway, I'm not sure there's anything wrong in that type of environment, with a little bit of understanding that things have to be paid for and your parents might not always have the money and it's tight budgeting. And whenever I've spoken to kids about that, I mean, probably I've only done it for kids over the age of 9 or 10, and certainly teenagers, when they have the epiphany moment of understanding what budgeting means, they actually become more supportive. It takes the pressure off the parents and it makes life easier. And so I would probably say it's maybe more crucial in those environments than anywhere else.
Can I just build on that? What we have observed is that, particularly in primary school, there can be vertical education going on.
Absolutely.
So young people are learning, they're taking it home, they're having those conversations in the home, and the parents are then realising that actually there's a different way of doing this. We've heard stories of parents saving money, opening credit union accounts, borrowing far less. It can work, that education.
That's what first got that teen cash class I talked about all those years ago. There was a 15-year-old boy who was very bright at maths, and he had a single mum who was a cleaner who was from an immigrant family and really struggled. And after that, he went home and he saved his mum 1,500 quid and took over the household budgeting. Right, and you know it wasn't a theoretical for him. It became absolutely something like, well, this is I see what we're doing, and he took over. And it does. The conversations can be really important. So, yeah, I think we both push more on that level.
I was also struck earlier on when we were talking about the resources available to schools. I mean, you know, I've been around a long time and I've seen lots and lots of interactions which is providing resource for financial education in schools, but which comes from a vested interest, and you know, it actually provided by banks or insurance companies or whatever. That concerns me, because it has to be said, you know, this stuff is not done without branding. And what is the branding? Therefore, it's an advertisement. And as you said before, you know, an advertisement is to make sure that the organisation concerned sells you stuff. So that kind of concerns me, and I really do think we should have a situation whereby this is done from a position where there's no vested interest involved. Would you agree with that?
I've always said the same thing. I always used to find it very difficult to see banks going in schools branded to teach kids, because we know that if you when many people set up a children's account, you've just bought their custom for life. Mm-hmm. So I have a real problem with. I'm very happy for financial institutions to pay and to fund it, but I don't want them to brand it. We had the discussions. This does not relate to my website in any way. This was a private donation. There is no branding on the textbook. This was all very deliberate, because I didn't want it to be, because I am opposed to branding in schools. I mean, you know, there's my bank, isn't it, which is a financial education provider. They're great. I mean, that's the bank I'd like to see go into schools, because it teaches you about banking, but it isn't there to make provision from you. So I think we do have to be very careful. And this is one of those frictions when you ask me, should teachers teach? Yes, because otherwise you're going to have branded institutions going in out with and selling their message. Right, and equally, you know, some could argue my message isn't right as well, and I'm happy to accept that. I don't want to be the one dictating it.
No, I also
bring Russell in on that, because
just to add, because of the quality mark process that we run, the financial education quality mark, the organisations that come to us for that quality mark, some of them are financial services organisations, others are educational organisations. There is nothing that we allow to be student facing and branded. So that's part of that quality assurance process. If it's branded and it's in front of young people, then it doesn't get the quality mark, and it will not be on our website available to teachers as a quality mark resource.
I also chair an all-party parliamentary group for parental involvement in education, and we've talked about this earlier on, and there's an organisation called Parent Kind which supports that all-party group. We've heard that young people who will receive a meaningful financial education at home are much more likely to be active savers and confident with money. So how can parents and carers be supported to provide this advice? And we've talked about, you know, youngsters taking it back into the home, but how can we support parents directly?
Well, look, it's one of the reasons we made it a free download for any parent and the teacher's guide as well. But I mean, parents are scared. It's why we're doing the adult guide, and we do the academy as well. You've got to educate. I mean, maybe it's like, my honest view is, of course we can put the resources in, and the parents who want to do it, they will find a way and they will do it. There are resources out there. I just want to be, I worry about the reliance on that, because there are just many parents who are too scared, who don't have the time or don't have the capability to do it themselves. So while it's really great, I think we need to make sure that we're putting as much provision that we can make universal to everybody as possible. But I mean, there are great resources, and we're building more great resources for parents to be able to help their kids. And the textbook helps. You know, when we put the textbook out the first time, the number of parents who came back and went, "I've learned so much." You know, you can imagine, because it's just really straight and factual and takes people through it. So there are good resources out there, and you know, I'm sure that Russell has many good resources for supporting parents, but I just don't want us to be reliant on that.
Okay. And finally, what should the government's priorities be when it comes to improving financial education? We've kind of gone through a lot of it, but in a nutshell, what do you think?
Making it happen.
Making it happen. Okay.
Yep. Consistency and assessment. So how do we know that it's having an impact? You know, that's really challenging, and schools need to know that it's having an impact, but equally government need to know it's having an impact. We're not subscribed to the OECD PISA study into financial literacy in the UK. That would be a fantastic position for us to be in, so that we can benchmark against other countries.
And earlier, Martin, you gave a figure for how much you could really launch this with. And now that the minister's sitting behind you, why don't you repeat the figure?
So I said if we put in 0.1% of the amount of PPI that was missold, which is £40 million into financial education. And as the Minister is in the room, I will go back I funded this textbook because the state wouldn't and told me it had to be funded by an individual. That is a political failing. I could have put bias into this textbook. We need proper textbooks, digital resources, we need teachers to be trained, and we need ongoing teacher training. And the impact on our economy, the impact on mental health, the impact of capability of young people, the impact on employability of young people would be manifest. And the 40 million is not a costed figure, and I know that's very important. It is not a costed figure, it is a totemic figure, but I think those are the scales of magnitude we are talking to be able to have a radical difference. If you gave young money £40 million to go and sort all this out, you could do a hell of a lot of good work. And I think it should be you, the state, or all of us, not reliant on private individuals, whether they're well-meaning or not.
Right, well, thank you. I think that's been a very useful session. I think that, Vicky, you were taking me to task for keeping sessions to time. So seeing as we have the Minister in the room, I'm going to bring him on. But I'm very grateful for your evidence, both Martin and Russell. Thank you.
The proceeding is currently suspended. 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 The proceeding is currently suspended.
Department for Education, and Kate Dixon, Director of Pupil Wellbeing and Safety at the Department for Education. I know you've heard a little bit of the last session, but I guess I'd just start by asking you, what is your assessment of the adequacy of financial education in schools and colleges in England?
Well, there's more than there used to be, and we'd like there to be more. You know, there's this ambition for 2 million more children and young people to be getting meaningful financial education by the end of the decade. I support that. Chairman, you and I, for a long time, since we first arrived in Parliament, have debated these matters. I do think it's really important that children leave school with a firm grasp of the knowledge and the life skills that will help them to thrive and protect themselves in adult life, and financial understanding, financial literacy, financial capability. It goes by many names, but is clearly a really important part of that.
And I think you'll find the committee in violent agreement with that aspiration. Our concern is, during the first session to this inquiry, we heard financial education described as dismal, inconsistent, in a parlous state. And just during this last session, we've heard a description of getting into the curriculum being a Pyrrhic victory and resulting in less outside resource getting into schools and not sufficient resource. So clearly there is demand for much more. You just talked about 2 million more pupils by the end of a decade getting access. But surely the point of having this in the curriculum is that every pupil should already be getting access to an adequate financial education. Why isn't that happening?
Well, I don't think you can say that's not happening. Every child does maths, and we have financial aspects of maths in the national curriculum, I mean, from infant school all the way through. Look, the way our overall school curriculum works, and no doubt someone will ask at some point about the distinction between being subject to the national curriculum or being an academy and not subject to the national curriculum. But whether you are or you are not subject to the national curriculum, you must have a broad and balanced curriculum, and you will be inspected by Ofsted by those criteria, and that curriculum should be comparable in breadth to the national curriculum. But the way it works is that over time, from the first years in school, you build up gradually the knowledge, the skills, the practice that you require in a number of subjects and disciplines. That's with financial understanding. That clearly starts clearly starts with maths. It clearly starts with numeracy. And then as school develops, so that develops into secondary school. You study, of course, concepts like simple interest and, crucially, compound interest, which I'm looking at Mr. Means because I think we're about the same age. Certainly when I was...
You reckon?
Just complimenting you, Ian. When we were at school, we didn't do compound interest, and that's probably possibly the single most important concept, mathematical concept, to understand in terms of financial capability and building up a pension, but also self-protection against accumulating interest rates. And then on top of that, there's the citizenship curriculum, which covers more direct kind of applied aspects of financial literacy and education.
And we'll come back to that in a moment. I just wonder, though, do you recognise the picture, and certainly what we've heard in the written evidence to this inquiry, is a degree of disappointment that 10 years on from changing the national curriculum to make this as the fundamental part in it, we still don't see more than about 35% of children in schools telling us that they're getting a financial education. And I think it's quite striking, some of the figures that you may have missed earlier, but from Young Enterprise talking about 2/3 of teachers tell us it's being taught in their school. Yeah. About 1/3 of pupils tell us that they're being taught financial education.
Well, not quite.
Those figures feel a bit too low.
Not quite, Chairman. I think what's tested in that survey is it's a thing called recalling having had a meaningful financial education. That requires two things. First of all, to have recalled it, but also to determine it to have been useful. Now, you could probably ask a lot of children if they had a meaningful education about the Vikings, and you might not get the same answer as you would get from teachers. We do know that, as you say, in a majority of certainly of secondary schools, I think from memory, 69%, but that maybe Kate may correct me on that. In secondary school, a smaller proportion of primary schools are covering money management, money education specifically. But look, I'm not getting away from that. I want, as I said earlier, I want there to be more financial education. I would like for kids to say spontaneously they had remembered it and had found it useful. We must also always remember that, of course, what happens at home and outside school is exceptionally important, and not everything that's relevant to financial capability and self-protection is actually about financial products itself. Some of it is about broader behaviours, broader attitudes, things like delayed gratification, which, of course, we teach in a much broader way through what happens at school, and indeed, of course, really importantly, what happens at home.
Ian Flick.
Thank you very much. From the session this morning, one of the things that was very apparent is about financial coordination. You need a financial coordinator, in the school, because at the moment the timetable is insufficient, and it's also spread between maths and also citizenship, but there's no coordination about how that works. So my question really is, should financial education be timetabled so that lessons are protected and delivery time is guaranteed, and also that the financial education is delivered in the right way?
Well, I certainly agree with the last part. Financial education certainly should be delivered in the right way. It would depend what you mean when you say there's no coordination between maths and citizenship. I mean, the way that the national curriculum is set up, and again, I know people will say, but not everyone's subject to the national curriculum. Actually, a lot of schools who are not subject to the national curriculum still follow the national curriculum, and those that don't still have to follow a broad and balanced curriculum, and that has to be comparable breadth and stretch to the national curriculum. I mean, it is designed as a whole. Deliberately, 2014, I think, when we brought financial education into the national curriculum following the campaigning of your chairman and others. Of course, that was within the context, within the framework of the overall national curriculum. And in terms of protected time, I mean, so the schools that are following that, I mean, it will be timetabled into, or citizenship will be timetabled into the into the secondary curriculum. But look, let's let's also be fair and realistic. There's a lot of things that we want to put into what kids learn at school. A lot of things, and I get, and again, your chairman will remember this from his time at the DFE. As a government minister, you do spend quite a lot of time hearing about all the extra things that people would like to have in the school day, or that are already in the school day and they'd like to have more of. And at the end of the day, you create a balance. And particularly with this subject, we think the most important thing is to have that mathematical grounding, because it underpins so much else.
I mean, this morning we've heard about how fundamental financial education is. I mean, for mental health and for life skills, basically.
Yeah.
So it is incredibly important. And what we've heard already is that there is insufficient time spent on it, and that, so what I was asking you for really is if we could produce a financial coordinator in each school who actually can put that programme into place and make sure that every child receives a decent amount of financial education, which is absolutely crucial, which is what we've been hearing about.
Well, Ofsted evaluate schools on a number of criteria, including on quality of education and including on their support for the personal development of children, both of which touch on these areas. I mean, in our school system as a whole, not just with regard to financial education, but with regard to everything, we don't specify that you should have these particular job roles and so on. I mean, every school obviously has a head teacher, but there's also a great deal of autonomy within the system. And then we have Ofsted as the external body to inspect and to make sure that a broad curriculum is being delivered, to make sure there is support for children and so on. And of course, mathematics and financial education would be part of that overall judgment.
Okay, so I just put it to you again, though, because this is a really important subject,
it is.
And it's fundamental to our productivity and to our economic success of this country. So it is that important that actually, the government really should be putting more emphasis on making sure that it works and that there's sufficient time. But I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Just to drill into some of the detail of this, because I think it is important that we look at where it is in the curriculum, where it is in terms of extracurricular activity and how it's supported. Currently, financial education is taught as part of PSHE, citizenship and maths.
And a little bit of computing. For absolute completeness.
Yeah, okay. But the elements of this, the only elements that are statutory are maths at primary level and maths and citizenship at secondary level. We've heard from a lot of witnesses who believe that statutory provision of education should be expanded. And you'll know that the all-party group has been pushing very hard around statutory expansion of provision at primary. What's your view on that? Do you think that would make a difference in sending the signal to schools about how important this is?
Well, look, I mean, I don't want to get too repetitive during the course of this session, but I mean, it's been our long-held view, and also just for what it's worth, I mean, I'm here as a government minister, but it's also been my personal long-held view, for what that's worth, that the single most important thing is the grounding that children get in mathematics and being comfortable with mathematics, including financial mathematics. And then that goes with a series of, and again, these are very long, and you and I we have personally debated these things a number of times over the years. But some of the principles that go with that about are quite closely related actually to kind of character development and understanding about the trade-offs between risk and reward. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Understand the link between effort and reward, and so on. And all of those things, of course, we do more broadly through education, not just as today in PSHE or in citizenship. Today we are doing financial education. Those things are things about overall child personal development, which really should run through what the school does.
So, I mean, you just said the fundamental thing, and I'm inclined to agree, is mathematical capability is very important to all this. And yet, at the moment, and I remember sitting in your position, writing lots of letters to colleagues about where financial education was. A lot of the content in financial education sits currently within the citizenship curriculum, and we've heard a strong argument from the Association for Citizenship Studies that they want to see that expanded and driven forward. However, at the moment, there are 22,000 entries for GCSE in citizenship per year, compared to 750,000 entries for maths. Given that discrepancy, and given, understandably, schools tend to focus on what they get measured on, and they get measured on grades and passes at GCSE, would you support increasing the proportion of financial education that is delivered within the maths curriculum in order to guarantee delivery time? Because a lot of what we've heard in this inquiry is that when it comes to citizenship, that's often only an hour a week in a secondary school. Yes, it's compulsory, but it's often only being delivered for a small amount of time. People aren't taking the GCSE in it. Does that mean that actually we're putting a lot of the potential content that we all wanted to see delivered through the national curriculum into a subject that isn't being measured and isn't being given sufficient preference for time?
Well, there is financial mathematics, and certainly financially relevant mathematics, even more broadly, in mathematics, all the way through school, starting in infant school, all the way up to GCSE, by the way, and beyond. So if you're doing functional skills qualifications at 16 to 18, that's a significant proportion of that curriculum. We may come on later to talk about the Advanced British Standard. I do think that is is an additional opportunity and and a really important one. But there is financial mathematics that children are learning. And then on top of that, as you say, there is citizenship, which is part of as a statutory part of the national curriculum in secondary.
But again, just to this point, mathematics curriculum, understandably, and maths GCSE, particularly since it was reviewed in 2014, has a lot of content in it.
Yes.
A small proportion of that content is financially focused.
Although a lot more of it is relevant to finance. So being comfortable with maths, being able to do percentages in your head, being in Tesco and saying that they put per kilogram on one thing and per 100 grams on the other, and being able quickly to compare the two and see which one is a better deal. You might not call any of these things financial, education, but they're all very, very relevant to not being ripped off and to be able to, find your way through life, taking competitive financial products and providing for yourself.
I don't deny that, but what we know, and we have plenty of evidence from other inquiries that we've done, that around 30% of people do not get a pass in maths GCSE. Of those, the vast majority, even when they do multiple retakes, do not get that grade 4 in maths GCSE. Wouldn't it be better for those people to be getting support to take a qualification in numeracy and financial literacy rather than repeatedly running at the same hurdle and not getting a pass in maths GCSE?
Well, Robin, as you know, there are different thresholds for what will happen at 16 to 18 if you don't get that GCSE at that grade straight away. So if you miss by one grade, you would be redoing GCSE, but if you miss by 2 grades, you would not necessarily be doing GCSE, and you may be doing functional skills qualification. And that's what I was referring to. And there is a significant part of that content is, because it is about trying to focus on the day-to-day maths. It's not only about financial stuff, it's kind of what you would need in your job. And it can vary depending on, does vary, in fact, depending on occupation, but it will also include financial maths.
And I think the committee has previously expressed views in our post-16 qualifications inquiry, for instance, that needs to be scaled up. And I know Robert Halfon, having discussed this with him, agrees from his position as skills minister. I hope there is an opportunity to scale that up.
Sorry, just before you move on, look, I think the seam that you are mining there is a rich one, and there is more focus now on maths to 18. For more young people and for everybody. And so, we, just to be clear, I'm not sitting here to try and argue against the points that you and the committee are making. We really welcome the fact that you're doing this inquiry and really look forward to hearing what you recommend as that system evolves.
I come to Ian.
I was 12, Damian, when you were born.
Yeah, I kind of knew that.
Anyway, right. We've heard that citizenship and the economic aspects of PSHE should be given statutory status at Key Stage 1 and 2 to improve the delivery of financial education in primary schools. Have you any particular views on that?
Well, as you know, we have citizenship as a statutory part of the national curriculum in secondary, both lower secondary and upper secondary. We don't have it as a statutory part of the national curriculum in primary school, but there is national curriculum content, non-statutorily there. We think that balance is right. We think it's most important in primary school to focus on getting those core mathematical skills, knowledge, and practice, which can then be built on into secondary school. And I don't think, I think a lot of people actually would agree with that. The curriculum is about building up, it's about building on, it's about developing as the child grows.
I know there's an element of how long's a piece of string about this, but and about trying to cram stuff into the curriculum. But I think from the evidence that we've heard, it does seem to be vitally important for young people's first of all educational development, but also their personal development as functioning adults once they leave the education system. So, I mean, are there any other steps that you might take to expand the provision of financial education at primary level?
Well, I'd say there is the non-statutory national curriculum content in citizenship, and there is the financial aspect. Explicitly financial aspects of mathematics in infant school as well as in juniors, like calculating in currency and being able to calculate change and all those sorts of things. I mean, I think one of the things that your previous session spent some time on, quite rightly so, I think maybe our session will as well, is about how you support and promote, the teacher in this. And of course, particularly in primary, of course, you were talking about, typically a teacher who will teach everything. And that's quite a different sort of thing. But even in secondary school, the materials and the support are incredibly important. I know you talked a bit about financial services institutions who create materials and so on. We might come back to that. But just for now, let me mention, the committee will know well that Oak National Academy, which started as was a great thing. It turned around kind of instantly, pretty much in COVID, to support online off-site learning, is now central to our plans on teacher workload and simplifying the task. And this committee will have heard many times over the years about the amount of times teachers spend on a Sunday evening trawling through the internet trying to find the appropriate thing, and that will be true in this financial education arena too, especially as perhaps something that the teacher isn't necessarily as familiar with to begin with, and there are so many different programs, including from different banks and financial services institutions. And Oak will be developing, first maths content, but also citizenship content, and that will be hopefully will shorten the time that it takes to find high quality material, because that obviously is highly certified, high quality teaching support.
So you think in terms of the amount of financial education within the maths curriculum, you think the balance is currently about right, or would you look at that again?
Ian, we will look at your committee's report, obviously, and we always take, as I hope you know, we always take very seriously what this committee says. It's a very thoughtful and reflective committee, and diligent, and doesn't jump to conclusions or make points for the sake of it. We will look at that very carefully. As things stand, to be clear, I'm content with where we are on the maths curriculum. I do think there's a further opportunity, as I say, with making sure that simplifying the process of teacher finding the best materials to support some of these areas of teaching.
And what are your plans to deliver financial education more robustly at post-16 level? And is this being considered as part of the development of the new Advanced British Standard?
Yeah, really important question. I mean, the short answer is yes. And of course, there will be different with ABS. There'll be different young people will be taking different types of maths. I mean, as they do now, of course. Already there's like 3 or 4 different types of maths you could be taking at that age group. But there definitely is an opportunity with more young people studying maths in some form, either as a major or a minor. There's more opportunity to do that. And I think there's a good argument as well that says, obviously a lot of young people age 18 are going to be moving, not just leaving home, but moving from their home area to go to another part of the country and doing like serious budgeting for the first time. They may have done budgeting before, but the sort of budgeting that involves high risks if you're not paying your rent or something like that. And I do think there is a strong argument for saying there's more perhaps that can be done in that area.
And are you looking at the post-16 curriculum outside of maths in terms of financial education?
So again, we will look at anything that you recommend. I mean, there's also, I forget what it's called now, Kate will remind me, but there's in the ABS, in the Advanced British Standard, there's also the pastoral, you don't know that one.
Yes, so we, obviously as part of ABS, we don't want to lose the PE, physical activity, the relationship, sex and health education parts that are part of the curriculum in secondary at the moment. You might want to also, you might be going there, but talk a little bit about the content in computing and relationships and sex education, because I think listening to Martin's session, actually the conversation you were having about sort of being a savvy consumer, we got onto gaming a little bit. So actually, we were talking about the distinctions yesterday about what's in each part of those curriculum, and in computing, the curriculum's teaching children to understand how the internet works, how algorithms are put together, and in the relationships, sex and health education curriculum, it's teaching about the behaviours, about online safety comes into both, but there was a conversation going on this morning about wisdom, being savvy, knowing that people might not be who they are. So I think all of that is very relevant in the financial market. And Vicky was also talking a lot about actually the communication with children online and the digital space. So.
This committee did a session on county lines and safeguarding, and that came up as a major factor in that, I have to say, was the use of online gaming as a grooming tool, and the risks of children being put under financial pressure through entirely virtuous-looking platforms, which were designed to allow them to communicate. The point we had raised today about game currency suddenly turning into real currency. There are some genuine safeguarding concerns around this. And I guess in terms of your role, Kate, and that side of things, are you comfortable that we are providing sufficient financial education to children at the right stage, that they are alert and aware to those risks? How much are we relying on perhaps computing curriculum or PSHE, which we know is delivered at varying quality and amounts of times in varying schools, to cover those messages versus curriculum taught subjects?
Well, I think the relationship, sex and health education and the computing curriculum are teaching the broad behavioural sort of antennae skills which fall into the safeguarding space. In terms of the percentages or working out exactly what's happening in the numbers, that's coming through maths. But I think the awareness to ask the right questions, to decide whether something is as it appears, I think the sort of interlink with misinformation and disinformation is all very relevant in the behaviours space. So I think that the two combined are getting young people to ask the right questions. I mean, you broadened a little bit into sort of adults as well, didn't you? I know that's not the focus of this inquiry, but being savvy consumers of information in general is something that we're trying to work on through those bits of the curriculum.
Yeah, I'm kind of really wondering, how are we going to encapsulate and ensure that the personal and societal elements of financial education are incorporated into post-16 delivery? Because it seems to me, we're looking at trying to do it a bit here, a bit there. Wouldn't it be better if it was just done in the round, particularly at that age group?
Post-16.
In terms of preparing people for the real world. I mean, they're already living in the real world, but, they're going to be living independently in the real world.
So, but just before we come on to that, can I just pick up just where you were moments ago? So we've used the phrase before, I've used the phrase before as well. There's sort of a fusion of these different curricula. So citizenship, RSHE, computing, they actually come together in a number of these things. And we want children not just to kind of understand how I keep myself safe, but to understand a bit about how some of these things happen, why somebody might pretend to be someone they're not, how they can make themselves come across in a certain way, and so on. And I've no doubt that we will have to continue to develop all that over time. But the best defence is usually about all these things, and it's true also with financial capability, is to get the kind of the base principles right. When we've debated some of these things in the past, I've commented that if when I was at school we'd had financial education, we would have learned about cheque clearing and endowment mortgages and final salary pensions. By the time we arrived here in Parliament, all that was pretty much irrelevant. Then, if you remember, we were debating payday loans, doorstep credit, debit cards were around. We were just about to have, but hadn't quite had auto-enrolment at that point. Now you're in a whole other world again, where I do think actually the development of cashless makes a big difference in this area, because all of us, when we were growing up, we got used to money as a physical thing. Pocket money was like a coin and a jar, and that is a different world now, and I think does call for more focus. But again, it does, I think, highlight that the more you can focus on the sort of principles and the general kind of good advice for life, rather than learning the specifics about particular financial products, the better. Sorry, I wasn't trying to dodge Ian's question about post-16. In short, yes, and I might let Kate come in on it as well. But that's why we have explicitly in the, what is at this stage still the broad design of the ABS, and obviously it will develop, but explicitly we are talking right from the start about the necessity of having that pastoral element. Yes,
whatever you say in your report is very helpful, because everyone's always fighting for space in the curriculum, aren't they?
We'll see how important you think it is when we get the response.
When you were talking about how the world moves on, I remember very vividly my mum paying for a school trip when I was about 5 or 6 with a cheque. And I remember very vividly asking her, why did she not pay with real money? Why did she pay with this cheque thing? So it sort of demonstrates the point about how everything moves on. At that point, there was a difference between real money and cheques. So now it's like, what are you swiping your card?
It's an interesting point, and of course, the point you've made about changes in money and the way you work was one of the arguments for moving away from teaching everybody IT and to focusing on computing in the curriculum. The other shift that took place as a result of that, though, was a much greater degree of specialism, with the people who study computing being a much smaller subset of people in schools than the people who study IT. Given that these issues are so pervasive, and certainly what we've been hearing in our screen time inquiry, something that confront every child during their teenage life, let alone their adult life, actually, is there not an argument that needs to be more universal? What you are teaching through the computing curriculum, but is only being taught to quite a small set of people who've pursued computing GCSE.
Except the computing, so we must distinguish the computing curriculum from GCSE computer science. So in the same way that lots and lots of children do art who never do art GCSE, or do drama and never do drama GCSE, children are doing computing in school from a much younger age, who may not go on to do computer science. You're right, computer science itself is a relatively small number of is growing, and that's good to see. But that kind of discussion of an understanding of like the principles behind how coding works, but also all the sort of real life applications, that's a much broader set of children.
And I think some of that computing sort of safety information is also delivered through PSHE and that side of things in school. Is that right, Kate?
But both, and as the Minister says, in computing before you get to GCSE, so computing in primary school cover online safety, computing in the beginning bits of secondary school will also cover online safety.
I mean, one observation which may be useful for you in conversations around this, Minister, is when I was sitting in your chair, we did the white paper. As part of that white paper, we committed not to rewrite the curriculum and to look at that. Yeah. But there were, and Kate will probably remember this, a lot of internal conversations around that. And one of the areas I was very wary of not rewriting the curriculum was specifically around financial education. And there was wording put into the white paper at the time. I can't remember whether it made the final draft, but specifically left space for enrichment of the existing curriculum. And that was specifically with regard, in my mind, writing it at the time, to financial education and some other areas which I reckon could benefit with enrichment. I would just point that out. I think it is important because obviously whilst I accept the basic premise that you will always be, and any minister for schools is always going to be under immense pressure to put extra things into a curriculum, and there is a good reason to not rewrite it every few years. And teachers need consistency, and we need consistency for qualifications and so on and so forth. I think there is a particularly strong case for enrichment in this space, and I just wonder, with the work that you're commissioning from Oak Academy to showcase on that front, how can you ensure that there is real enrichment of financial education within that, rather than it just fitting in as a subset in those various curriculum subjects? Is that something that you think there's scope to do in showcasing what can be done with Oak Academy, is to provide that greater enrichment in this space?
Well, first let me say, look, on not changing the curriculum the whole time, I mean, that is true. It is important for teachers and their workload. It is also important for consistency qualifications and so on. It's also important for the quality of teaching, though, and therefore for the benefit of the children, that you have some stability. And, we do have a very good curriculum. We have very good results when measured, against other countries in mathematics and other subjects. And we should remember our strengths and the great work that is delivered by our amazing teachers. To your point, I mean, enrichment. I mean, who's going to argue against that? That was a good thing. Enhancement, enrichment, of course, we support. The work I mentioned with Oak, I mean, what doesn't change the curriculum, but it does, in a sense, enhance, or what's written in the curriculum. So, there's a lot of development work goes into these materials, and then it is easy to find, easy to deploy, because it fits into an ordered sequence.
Yeah. And that enrichment enhancement, I think, is really important in this respect. I mean, just on the point of international measurement, I'll bring in Mohammed, because I think it's an issue we've heard quite a lot about in this inquiry.
Thank you so much. Obviously, my question is about program for international student financial literacy assessment. We heard the benefits of this from our witnesses. The reason for that is that because the literacy, financial literacy assessment is different than education, math, science, and reading. It's optional, as you know, but since 2012, 23 other countries took advantage of this program. The UK, we decided to not take part in this. Why?
Well, the simple answer to that question, why we didn't, is to reduce the burden on schools. And I mean, not all countries do take part in the financial, is it called financial literacy? But that part of the PISA assessment. And it is the case this time around that a number of countries, I mean, it's you do have to find schools to take part in PISA, and it's not compulsory for schools to take part. A number of countries this time around, in particular, found it harder to find schools, sufficient schools to take part than in previous rounds. And as I say, we determined not to do this optional part, partly for that reason. It's a significant number of extra kids that you need. So it's something like 30 more on top of the 45. I can't remember the exact numbers, but there's a certain number of children you need to sit like the regular PISA test, and then if you do the optional test, you need to find additional children to do it as well, and that obviously just is a bigger burden on schools. All that being said, I don't rule out us doing it in the future. I think the financial capability assessment might be every other cycle in PISA, or I'm not sure it is every cycle.
2025 would be the next
one.
one.
But I wouldn't. We don't necessarily rule it out. We'd have to look at that at the time, as I say, in the context of those burdens. But let me say another thing about PISA. So we obviously do take part in the maths assessment. And we also know from the countries that do both the maths and the financial literacy assessment, there is a really strong correlation between doing well in the one and doing well in the other. And we, of course, and not just in this cycle, but also the previous cycle, have scored well in maths, which suggests, because of that strong linkage, that also children in England would have strong capability in financial capability. But as I say, I don't rule out us taking part in the future.
You're not committing at the moment? You're not committing it at the moment?
I'm not committing at the moment. I mean, we'd have to see. Look, these are difficult. These are decisions you have to make, because you have to make sure you're going to have enough schools, enough children taking part, and without overburdening them. But I do also look. I'm not dodging the point. I mean, I do also see the value. Yeah. Truth be told, the question doesn't come up for a while, and when it comes up, obviously we'll address it seriously.
But rather than deciding, from a ministerial level not to participate, why don't you just ask schools if they would like to participate?
Absolutely.
Well, you don't. You do it on a country basis. I don't know, Kate, if you're sufficiently close to the PISA entry thing to say, but you have to have a whole country. In our case, whole country is England, because it's an educational jurisdiction. Some PISA results, as you know, are reported on England level, some are UK level. But you can't. I don't think. I mean, you can't just enter as like an individual school, for example.
I don't know, but I think it's probably unlikely. I think your point is you're doing a lot of work with another hat on to try and reduce the burden on teachers. The question is, in the round, is this?
It's a balance, always.
Exactly.
It's always a balance.
I mean, I guess one observation I'd make on this, you kindly said you'll pay a lot of attention to the recommendations of this committee. This may well be among them, and to make a political observation. Any incoming government is likely to be looking at some kind of curriculum and qualifications review. Wouldn't it be incredibly valuable to be able to show any potential incoming government the value of work that's been done in this space and the level of capability that they're working with when it comes to financial literacy? And from that perspective, actually from a civil service perspective, isn't there a value in having these kinds of pieces of research available to support work that is likely to be done by any government of any other colour, if that were the unfortunate event of a general election? I can say that. I don't know if you have a view on that.
What can I say? I mean, you've made that point. But I would also just say to the committee, just encourage you also to look at the R-squared correlation in the PISA results of the countries that did both assessments, and I think that's probably worth reporting on as well, because it is directly relevant to financial capability.
Okay, bring back.
Move on to the role of Ofsted. Does the fact that financial education is not a separate curriculum subject in its own right, how will it affect Ofsted when they come to examine it?
So look, I mean, like the number of meetings that your chairman will have dealt with when he was schools minister, people who want to add things into the curriculum. I mean, the second longest queue is the people who want to add things onto the Ofsted inspection. I mean, I'm sounding slightly flippant, but it actually just is true. Everybody wants to add everything into as a specific criterion, specific element of inspection, and what we do with Ofsted, what Ofsted do, is they assess the school in the round, and we have quite a high level of autonomy for schools, including things like setting curriculum and timetable time and all the rest of it. But they need to be able to demonstrate the high quality of education and the breadth of the curriculum and how they're supporting children's personal development. And financial education touches on all those things without having to be a separate sort of evaluation category.
Will the department do anything? Will the department review how financial education is being inspected by Ofsted?
Well, Ofsted are themselves, frequently thinking about what it is they inspect and how they inspect. As you may know, there's an exercise be going on shortly through Ofsted, listening to views on that whole system. No doubt this committee will be discussing that. And so, I mean, specifically on the question of, if you're inviting me to say, do I think financial education should be a specific line item on Ofsted reports, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that today. No.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I observe is, having given evidence to the House of Lords inquiry when they looked into citizenship education, there was huge frustration both from the House of Lords and from the citizenship teachers and associations at the time, that they felt that the evidence that they had from Ofsted miscategorised what they saw as the teaching of a subject for a small element of personal development. And that was something back then, and this was a couple of years ago, admittedly, but it was something that caused enormous frustration and resentment amongst that part of the profession. I think there is a specific challenge here with the fact, as you've said, very neatly illustrated, that it does fall between various different stools. And I think it comes back to the point that Flick was making, that Martin was making to us, about the need for coordination and the need for support in this. One of the things, just listening to both this session and the previous sessions, that has struck me is there's a lot of read across here to the work that we did and that the department has been doing on careers education advice and guidance, and the coordinating role that we have encouraged and supported in schools around that could be married up to some degree of coordination when it comes to that financial education and looking across the curricular and extracurricular aspects of that. Can you envisage a way of engaging with that and supporting that?
Well, I think you're talking about the Careers and Enterprise Company and the Gatsby benchmark.
But also the role of careers advisors in schools, where you've got somebody who is doing that coordination and actually is coordinating curricular and extracurricular activity around this. That's very much what we've been hearing is needed when it comes to financial education, and not currently designed into the system.
In what sense?
In the sense of actually making sure that there is coherence between what is taught as part of PSHE, what is taught as part of maths, what is taught as part of citizenship, and that there is a structure going through the school's curriculum when it comes to building up the overall financial capability. So I just think that's something to think about. But also, I do just want to come back to this point about Martin Lewis's book, because I understand the challenges when it comes to the department engaging with specific materials, and I can understand some of the concerns around that. But the reality is, we've heard consistently through this inquiry that there is a need for high quality materials and support for teachers to deliver what, after all, was a new curriculum subject in 2014. We've heard consistently that there is a concern within the teaching profession about their capacity to deliver on this, and so I just wonder if, across Oak, the work that's already gone on with Martin Lewis and so on and so forth, one of the messages that the department can take away is if we want to succeed in our aspirations for this to be a major subject in schools, there does need to be some investment in the source material and the work of that. And I think, I'd reflect on Ian's concerns, and I think we all share some degree of concern about the amount of branded material that finds its way into schools on these issues. I'm all in favour of the private sector engaging with schools, but actually, when we're trying to build up financial capability and a consumer degree, I do worry particularly with some of the big banking brands, but that may not be the best way to do it. Now, there are lots of other organisations like the Financial Times, the MAPS we've heard a lot about, and so on and so forth, who want to lean into this space. Yes. How can the department support and create the space for them to be able to make a contribution?
Well, first of all, can I just join you in thanking Mr. Lewis for what he did with the and funding it with the textbook. I mean, you're right. There are a number of different organisations. We calculate 46 different financial services organisations. We think providing some materials. That doesn't necessarily mean they're all necessarily branded or have an advertising bent in that way, but there are others. You mentioned the FT. There's also, HMRC provide materials, the National Crime Agency provide materials. I think, to be fair, one of the criticisms, you haven't levelled this criticism, but one of the criticisms you could have levelled is there's so much. How do you how do you discern? How do you find your way through? We did hear at the end of the last session, of course, about MAPS and their quality mark, which I think is a really important part of that, both certifying the products, and also we were hearing that, of course, that is also defence against the branding and marketing aspects that Mr. Means was talking about. We don't, as you know, Ron, we don't. For any subject, there isn't a national maths book. There isn't a national history textbook, and there never has been. That's just not the country we are. There are countries where there is a national history textbook, and you will have met, foreign ministers, government ministers in those countries. They say we've just changed it, and the mind sort of boggles because that's just not the way our system works. To change an aspect of what a child learns in school is a multi-layered thing with many different people involved. It's about the national curriculum, it's also about the GCSE specification, it's about who writes the materials, then it's about the person in the front, standing at the front of the class.
We do have that's becoming standardised via the academy.
Well, maybe I'm taking too long in my answers, because you anticipate where I was going, which is to say that now, and this is not, by the way, to replace that diversity, and I think in many ways it is actually a great feature of our system that we have such diversity, but we are now investing in Oak National Academy. Partly it's to do with that consistency and sequencing. You may recall this comes from if you track back the history here, there was a project about coherent curriculum.
There is a contradiction here. You're celebrating the diversity of what's being taught and then investing in a standardised approach.
Well, it's not a standardised approach because it's not compulsory.
I know it's not, but yeah.
It is, but it is there to be sequenced, a coherent programme, fitting together, and crucially quick and easy to access. And that is, teacher workload is really, really high on my list of things that we need to keep on addressing, and this is a really important part of that. So you're right about. You call it a contradiction. I was going to say a balance to be struck. There is at the end of the day, the two sides of the same coin, right? There is a balance to be struck there, but we think that is a helpful addition. Oh, and by the way, it will be. The independence of Oak is a really important part of this. So this is not somebody in the minister's office in DFE saying that this is what should be there. It is about it's about a body of experts themselves coming up with that.
Very good. Who picks the expert? That's the thing.
I think this could.
They do. No, exactly.
Itself. But I know if Andrew were here, he would be potentially a little more challenging on the Oak front as well, because I think he has raised a number of questions about it over the years. But I think it's been a useful session. I think we all recognise the importance of financial education here. I think remembering back to my own school reports, I'm not sure we would necessarily be able to say this was job done. I think there might be a must try harder on the report here around getting financial education universally taken up and delivered. But I think we recognise some of the points that you've made about what is currently going on, and very much appreciate the warmth that you have suggested towards being able to respond to our recommendations as a committee. So we will bear that in mind when we're drafting them. I think this is. I'm grateful for your input today, Minister. Order.